today we're focusing on resettlement, right? So resettlement is when a refugee is brought to a third country and given a pathway to citizenship, like the refugees that we have here in the United States, that we have in Canada. Our next speaker, I believe, might tell us a little bit more about other resettlement countries. And if not, then you can look it up. But today we're going to learn more about the resettlement process specifically in the United States. And then we're going to hear the experiences of resettlement from 3 individuals, 2 who resettled here in the United States and 1 who resettled in Canada.
So our first speaker is Anne Richard, who is currently a distinguished fellow and senior advisor to the Afghanistan Human Rights Coordination Mechanism for Freedom House. In 2012 through 2017, she served as Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Refugees, and Migration in the Obama administration. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Ms. Richard was the Vice President of Government Relations and Advocacy for the International Rescue Committee. Earlier in her career, she served in other senior positions at the State Department, at Peace Corps headquarters, and at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. You can read her full bio in the link in the chat. So with that, Anne, welcome.
So before we start, let's acknowledge that the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has issued its latest estimates on the number of refugees and displaced all around the world. This happens every year on or about World Refugee Day, which is June 20th, so 2 days ago. Once again, tragically, the numbers set very high, very sad numbers. Nearly 110 million people are forcibly displaced around the world, and 35 million meet the definition of a refugee. 30 million of those refugees are of concern to the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, and more than 5 million Palestinian refugees receive services from UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. But the larger numbers reflect the numbers of internally displaced persons and asylum seekers and others of concern around the world. Our talk today, however, is focused on the small percentage of the world's refugees who seek to get resettled in the United States. Next slide. So this slide, which you can find online from the Migration Policy Institute, and they do a good job updating it from time to time, gives you the two lines. It shows the history of the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program in numbers of refugees, dating back to its authorization in the 1980 Refugee Act. And 1979, 1980, there was a lot of work on legislation to set up this program because of efforts to cope with the large numbers of Indo-Chinese refugees coming to the US. If you have a hard time reading this slide, these slides will be available on the website. So you see the high water mark was back in the Carter administration, the beginning of the Reagan administration. And at the time, and for many subsequent years, Republicans and Democrats both supported robust refugee resettlement programs to the US. The blue line is the ceiling that the White House seeks as a cap on the number of refugees arriving each year and can also be considered a planning number. The orange line reflects the actual numbers that came in. And you can see that after 9/11, midway across the chart, the program nearly stopped because all travelers to the United States stopped for a few weeks. And George Bush administration resumed it and picked up, and the numbers pick up again over time. And during the Obama administration, during the time I served as Assistant Secretary, we took measures to have 3 years of predictable arrivals. You can see a flat level there around over 2015, where the the goal of how many we're going to bring in and the numbers we actually brought in matched. And the idea was to have stability and then to plan an increase for 2016. Not visible here was a proposed increase for the following year, fiscal year 2017, which is when a new president was to take office. And instead of that increase, you see the sharp decline proposed and then incorporated by the Trump administration over several years. So most recently, President Biden has reestablished the ceiling in line with a campaign promise of 125,000 refugees per year. But in terms of numbers brought in through this specific program, you see it's not close to reaching that. In fiscal year 2021, 11,411 came in. Fiscal year 2022, 25,465 came in. And so far this year, by the end of May, 31,797 refugees came in through this program. And so you can see there's an intention to build it back up, and that the different policies of the Trump and Biden administration show the real swing that happened between trying to bring the numbers down and now trying to bring them back up again. And because these are people's lives, you can't turn them on and off again like a light switch. These programs take time to set up and bring people in. Next slide, please. This slide shows where resettled refugees come from. This information from Migration Policy Institute provides information on the most recent full year, fiscal year 2022, with the top countries sending refugees to us, people leaving Democratic Republic of Congo, people leaving Syria, people leaving Myanmar, also known as Burma. And if you look back over the last 10 years, the Middle East also had refugees from Iraq, fleeing Iraq and then trying to get resettled in the US. And the numbers remain high then from over time from Myanmar and the Democratic Republic of Congo. But as you glance down the list, you see you see a number of places where you should be familiar with conflict and crises that drive people from their home countries. Next slide. So what are the steps in the US resettlement process that a refugee would go through? And how do they get, if they express an interest in coming to the US, how do they get to the US? Overall process is responsibility of the State Department, the Population, Refugees, and Migration Bureau, the one I used to head. But in recent administrations, the White House has been much more involved. For example, the National Security Council was very involved during the Obama administration, and Stephen Miller in the White House during the Trump administration. Both the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and Health and Human Service Office of Refugee Resettlement play very important roles. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, a US embassy, specially trained NGOs, or a private sponsor refers a refugee applicant to the US for resettlement. So an applicant, a refugee, fills out a form, but their form has to be routed to the US program through these reputable organizations or embassies. The case is first received and processed by what's called an RSC, a Resettlement Support Center. And the RSC staff review the applicant's file and help complete it, helping the refugees to tell and document their story and get ready for an interview by representatives of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. The next point says adjudication. And this process that USCIS leads is to determine whether a refugee meets the legal definition of being a refugee, which you all recall is based on the purpose for why they're fleeing and the fact that they've crossed, in most cases, an international border. And they also seek to weed out liars, criminals, and terrorists. At this point, vetting refugees also involves many other US national security and law enforcement agencies, because if any US agency has derogatory information about the applicant, that's supposed to surface before they are invited to the United States, and is supposed to screen them out. Post-adjudication processing prepares successful applicants to travel. They need to pass health screenings and placement assurance from a US-based resettlement agency, and in some cases, a sponsor. Cultural orientation is to help refugees prepare to live in the United States and alongside Americans. And part of this is to help them adjust their expectations about how they will live in the United States. The travel piece is arranged by the International Organization for Migration. They will schedule flights for refugees coming from abroad, and the refugees are expected to pay back the cost of their plane tickets. So refugees arrive owing money for a travel loan. The resettlement agencies meet refugees at the airport and take them to new home, where they have a culturally appropriate meal waiting for them, enrolls their kids in school, and helps able-bodied adults get jobs. Let's move to the next slide. These are the organizations that run resettlement support centers around the world. Several of the ones, the first four are run by non-governmental organizations in Nairobi, Vienna, in Istanbul, and also in Bangkok, Thailand. And then the International Organization Migration itself also runs some of the RSCs in several places around the world. So they're the ones helping refugees apply and get ready to go. Next slide, please. Here's the 10 resettlement agencies or networks that stretch across the US that help the refugees once they've arrived in the US. There used to be 9. So if you see reference to 9, there were for many years 9, but the newest is Bethany Christian Services. Of the group of 10, 7 are faith-based, 3 are NGOs that are not faith-based. And all of the organizations must agree to take refugees from wherever they're coming from around the world, and also not to proselytize. So refugees should get a similar level of service, no matter which agency is welcoming them to the United States. Next slide, please. So this slide is prepared by the State Department, and I remember showing it for the first time to Secretary Kerry, who loved it because it shows that refugees are resettled all over the United States. And my experience was that refugees could be resettled almost everywhere around the United States. And you see that the different colors of the boxes show which organizations are working where. And so when, for example, when I was at the International Rescue Committee, they were particularly strong on the East Coast, the West Coast, and Texas. These networks across the US shrunk during the Trump administration and have now been built back up. And yes, Wyoming accepts no refugees. So this, I just love this graphic, and it's not prepared by me. It's prepared by the State Department and updated most years. And I think the key to this is to help people see that this is a national program that's taking place all around us, whether citizens know it or not. Next slide. Okay, where do the refugees go? Over half over the past 10 years have gone to 10 states: Texas, California, New York, Michigan, Ohio, Washington, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Florida. But as you see, a little less than half go elsewhere. Next slide, please. You know, I should say that the decision of where to send people is partly looking for places where there's a demand for workers, affordable housing, especially for big families living on initially small incomes, and a relative level of safety. Texas is a destination, a top destination, because there are jobs in Texas. California, I can't mention California without thinking about the Somali refugees who end up being sent, many of them, to connect with family, and some go to Minnesota and some end up in San Diego. What a difference in climate. So you can think to yourself whether your hometown would make a good welcoming spot for refugees. I certainly think coming in through Kennedy Airport must be very unsettling. It's that day where refugees travel. It's got to be one of the major days they remember in their lives. So what is new? The Biden administration reopened a program that the Obama administration started to bring children from Central America to the US if they had a parent who was legally present in the US, so that they would not make the dangerous trek across Mexico. And that program has been restarted then. There's also been, since August 2021, efforts to bring in Afghans who were evacuated because they had worked with US military, US embassy, or other US efforts. And they were brought in under parole. So not as refugees, but people allowed to be here for a couple of years. And they are very interested in getting a more permanent place here in the US. Similarly, a program was started after the Ukraine war broke out, Uniting for Ukraine, You for You, which was a little different than bringing Afghans in. Afghans were brought to US military bases at first, and then work was done to resettle them across the US with the help of resettlement agencies. Ukraine program was run that Ukrainians, many of whom had relatives in the US, could be matched with their relatives or sponsored by their relatives. So both of these things were new, different ways of bringing people seeking refuge into the US. From that, there's a lot of experimentation going on, and the Biden administration has announced the Welcome Corps, which you can find out information about on the State Department website. And the idea that there's a new priority for refugees, which are people who are matched with sponsors in the US, either because the sponsors know about them or know their story or want to take up their cause. Also, a final note is that we've talked about refugee resettlement, but there's also people who come to the US and seek asylum. And what's been in the news a lot lately is the idea that the southern border has people coming, some who might perhaps best be classified as economic migrants, but others are fleeing real concerns for their safety and are seeking asylum because they fear for their lives, and or have had their lives disrupted by events in their countries. And so one of the things that is interesting on this point is that we see more asylum seekers crossing the southern border from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Peru. If you look at our last slide, it's a chart from the last slide, please, Kate. That's not it. There it is, from the Pew Research Center, which shows recent totals of border encounters. And it used to be that the authorities at the US-Mexico border would mostly find Mexican men of working age trying to come across the border to work in the US. And then since the Obama administration, we've seen a big uptick of people coming from what are called the Northern Triangle countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, who are fleeing drug gangs and difficulties, dangers in those countries. And what is interesting here is that we see people coming from further afield in Latin America. And so this is a challenge, of course, for getting them help at the border and for trying to ensure that people who deserve asylum are granted it, and people who don't qualify are sent home, and are not sent home in a way that will endanger their safety.
So we are now going to be moving to hear 3 individuals who have experienced resettlement, either in the United States or in Canada. So our first speaker is Momo Tun. She is actually unable to be with us live today. So she prepared a video for us that we will share with you. She is a rising junior at Indiana University here in the Hamilton Lugar School for Global and International Studies. And as you will hear, she came to the United States from Myanmar, also known as Burma, when she was young. So Kate, let's get this started.
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my journey as a refugee student. My name is Momo Tun, and I'm currently a junior at Indiana University Bloomington, where I'm pursuing a degree in East Asian languages and culture. I aspire to become a physician assistant. Originally from Magui region in Alan City, Myanmar, my family and I left our country when I was just 3 years old, seeking refuge in the Nopok camp in Thailand. At the age of 7, my family and I arrived in the United States and we settled in Oklahoma City. From the age of 10, I found myself shouldering the responsibilities of overcoming language barriers from my family after arriving in the United States. While juggling 2 languages, I spent countless hours grappling with complex interpretations at various settings, such as hospitals, government offices, and more. Initially, interpreting at these places was intimidating because I was not comfortable with my English skills. However, with experience and schooling, my English skills improved, and I found that just like my parents, other Burmese families in the community needed assistance as well. While being a middle school student, a daughter, and an interpreter, I had to strike a balance providing interpretation assistance to my parents and other Burmese refugees in Oklahoma City who placed their trust in me. One of my most impactful moments during my interpretation journey was when I had the privilege of assisting a family friend named Thanda during the birth of her first child. For 9 hours, I stood by her side, offering encouragement through each contraction. I recall holding her hand tightly as she pushed, and I watched in awe as the doctor used forceps to guide the baby through the birth canal. The rush of adrenaline that surged through my entire body when the newborn entered the world was a feeling that I could never forget. I was overwhelmed with emotions and shared tears of happiness and joy with the mother. And as an honor, Thanda allowed me to name her child, and I chose Nyingchen A, which translates to someone who emits peace and tranquility. This profoundly moving experience further solidified my unwavering determination to pursue a career in medicine. As a first-generation student, I felt the weight of responsibility to excel academically, not just for myself, but to prove that I could succeed in this new academic environment. Upon graduating from high school, my father recommended that I enter the workforce instead of pursuing a college education, fearing that he wouldn't be able to provide sufficient financial support for my aspirations in the medical field. However, despite his apprehensions, I made the decision to embark on my college journey. Another significant milestone was when I obtained the U.S. citizenship. This achievement stands out to me as one of my most proudest and most rewarding accomplishments, even though the journey to achieve it seemed intimidating and lonesome at times. My life in the US offered little time for me to reflect on my years in the refugee camp. I recall my days in the refugee camp were filled with carefree memories of playful friendships and imaginative adventures. However, the military takeover of Myanmar 2 years ago prompted me to re-examine my past and connect it to the present. The simplicity of friendships and school life was comforting in the camp. A 20-minute walk led us to our classrooms, which were divided by thin walls crafted from bamboo trees. Despite the diverse age range, we all studied the same material, and due to the imbalanced student-to-teacher ratio, it was not uncommon for some students to feel a sense of falling behind. Although we were physically distant from Myanmar, the Burmese community in the camp ensured that the children remained connected to their traditions and customs. Within the Buddhist community, ordination ceremonies were prevalent, especially when the children reached the ages of 6 or 7. And these ceremonies served as reminders of our cultural heritage, fostering a sense of belonging and identity. I was shielded from the weight of adult worries and fears in the camp. Yet I remember the nights when gunshots echoed and people would gather clutching their belongings in response. Back then, I found excitement in these moments without understanding their true significance. However, now I understand that our camp, located on the Myanmar and Thailand border, requires such preparedness due to an ongoing ethnic conflict that threatened our safety. Growing up, I heard stories about why my family had to leave our homeland. 14 years ago, the military imposed a threat to our family due to a family member's activism. Any individual who dared to speak out or oppose the military were immediately imprisoned. And these stories, once resonating with my younger self, now provide a painful blueprint for the tragic events unfolding today in Myanmar. 1 month ago, a military airstrike killed more than 150 individuals, including innocent children, in a town called Kampalu. And the aftermath of this catastrophe was filled with bloodstains and scattered body parts. Any individual who managed to find safety tried cleaning up the aftermath, hoping to locate survivors. And recently, the military have been bombing schools in small villages and imprisoning or death sentencing people speaking out against them. Despite the lack of support from around the world, the people's defense and resilience will remain unwavering. And the People's Defense Force, PDF for an example, are composed of young individuals and pro-democracy activists who are battling the military to protect their citizens and uphold democratic values. For the past 2 years, people in Myanmar have been subject to terror under the military rule, and there are also numerous untold stories and voices that urgently need to be heard by the people of Myanmar. And unfortunately, there is minimal to no media coverage about Myanmar, particularly on the campus. In order to raise awareness and provide aid to Myanmar, I took an active role in organizing impactful protests and fundraisers within the Fort Wayne community, where I currently reside. These experiences have transformed me, inspiring a deeper exploration of Myanmar's rich history and diverse culture. In the upcoming academic year, I will be working with Indiana University faculty members and dedicated school staff to organize informative events and engage in discussions regards to Myanmar. And I eagerly anticipate these incredible opportunity to promote empathy, foster understanding, and empower others to learn more about Myanmar. With an heartfelt gratitude, I thank you again for giving me this opportunity and a platform to share my story. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Momo in her absence, and everyone who made this video presentation possible. I'd now like to introduce you to Nahid Sharifi. As you will hear, Nahid was resettled in the United States in 2021 from Afghanistan. She currently lives in Indiana, where she is a doctoral student at Indiana University. So with that, Nahid, welcome.
Thank you so much for making this great opportunity to share my experience in the United States and my past or previous experience in Afghanistan. As you mentioned that I'm doing PhD study at the School of Education at Literacy, Culture, and Language. And in Afghanistan, I was advocate for women's rights in Afghanistan, and I was a lecturer at the university in Kabul. And I have been a voice for breaking taboo about the gender and try to getting women more involved and supporting them to understand more about their important role in the future of Afghanistan. I left Afghanistan in 2021 when the Afghan government fell and the US force withdrew. Based on my previous experience, I grew up in the refugee family for the first time when the Taliban took over, and we moved out to Iran, and then when again Afghanistan, you know that in the 2001, once again Taliban, you know that the Taliban's government fell, we came back to the Afghanistan, but unfortunately again Afghanistan fell. So I'm going to talk about how I get to the United States and talk about being at the Adderbury camp. When I arrived in the United States, I was in Adderbury camp in Indiana, and talk about after the resettling in Bloomington and what I'm doing now. So based on my experience, I thought that I was a university lecturer at the Kabul University, and the first picture is my classes that we were talking about, or this class was a leadership class that I tried to hold it for my students, and I use of the many opportunity for my students in order to get them more involved in a different program that women can, you know, that sometimes in Afghanistan it's very difficult for women to take part in some program because on that time we had a security problem, and some of their family, they do not let their girl or their women's to participate in anywhere or even the private courses. But I try to hold this kind of the free classes for my students in order to promote their understanding about the different programs, especially about the leadership program. So in the August 2021, so overnight, you know, that all of the dream turned into the nightmare. Education and being educated became a crime for most people, especially for women. I recall when I burned some of my documents, especially about my appreciation letter that I received them from different programs, because the government fell, and I afraid of the Taliban, that I thought that they might found this kind of the documents. So I tried to burn some of this document. So when the war changed in this nightmare, so my priority changed in this condition, this circumstance. So I left Afghanistan in August 2021, and it was tragedy for me, but it didn't mean it's a disaster. It means that in a few minutes, I have to make a decision for myself and even for my family. So I had two choices. I have to stay like many other educator or some of my colleagues, they have never got back to their work or develop their professions and they follow their dream, because you know that since 2021, all of them, or they have to, some of them they were killed or eradicated, and some of them luckily still living but in hidden. Or another choice was to leave the country, speak up and fight for the dream of my people. It's absolutely clear that I chose the second one. So I knew that starting this kind of the journey would be with many challenges and difficulty, but I accepted all these challenges. I left behind my memory, my family, my students, even my profession and background. So on that time, I need the time to bring back all my possessives. But you know that it's not easy starting from scratch, but I have to be stronger because of my people, because of my students that is still, you know, that they are in very bad situation, very bad circumstances in Afghanistan. You know that it's very difficult when your country be like a jail for yourself. You know that you cannot go anywhere. You have to just band in home, you know. It's not easy, especially for women, you know, Afghan women. They fight a lot in order to find their way and, you know, that promote in different positions. It's not easy. Based on this slide that you can see that my journey was so long journey. And after the falling the Kabul, our flight took off in Germany, and I was in a Germany base for 10 days, and then they move us to the US base in Adderbury camp. In the Adderbury camp for 4 months. I was in the Adderbury camp for 4 months. The soldier, they were very, very supportive people. They did their best in order to prepare many things for Afghans. But you know that in here, in the camp, I try to make myself so busy because of the trauma that I had. I try to participate in some of the program that help for Afghans. I try to be as an interpreter for some of the women, especially they have some problem as a medical problem, health problem. So I try to help them and try to find the way in order to make myself busy. So after the resettling, you know that after in the camp, after the 4 months, I resettle, I leave the camp, and my mood completely was off. And on that time, I needed time to find myself, to deal with my trauma. And it's alive. My trauma is still alive. I struggle a lot to overcome this kind of the challenge. I resettled in Bloomington in December 2022. And for the first time, I feel that I'm at home because some of the volunteer, some of the IU professor helped me to find the house, to find the job. And it wasn't easy for me. I have never expected this kind of the very warm welcoming. But I'm sure that without the support of this kind of the people, it was very difficult for me to overcome these challenges. You know, that they helped me to resettle, they helped me to find a job, to find a house, especially, you know, that finding the house in Bloomington is so difficult. But these kind people, they helped me to find a house. And so finally I resettled in Bloomington, and they helped me to get to the IU University and pursue my educations, because on that time I was at the middle of my PhD study when the Afghanistan fell. So I was completely overwhelmed and thought that everything's for me is done. I feel that I cannot stand again on my feet, but you know that step by step I try to find my way. And so at the first time I was so hopeless, but right now I'm so hopeful for the future, especially for my students. So based on I would like to talk about what I'm doing now. So when I compare myself to the last 2 years, I cannot believe that I finally could find my way. You know, that I'm so hopeful. I want to do something for my students, especially for women right now, because you know that everything, all of their dream, all of their whatever they achieved during the 20 years, suddenly over the night is done. You know that Afghan women struggle a lot in order to promote themselves, but suddenly everything is done for them. But now, the most important things that I consider for my people right now, I initiated the online classes for my students, for undergrad students. I'm so happy that finally I could do something for them. I started these classes at the end of April this year, and at the end of June, my online classes would be is over. It would be over. So my students, they are so happy when I initiated these online classes, and it was about academic writing, because they told me that, oh, finally someone hear our voice. Finally someone. Yeah, I'm so happy that I initiated these online classes for my students. It's unofficial classes, and I hope that I could follow this kind of the classes in the future for my students. But I need help. I need help in order to promote and keep this kind of the classes for my students, because I'm at the beginning of at the first step, and my students so interested about this kind of the classes, and they would like to this kind of the classes be continue in the future. Yeah, thank you so much, and I'm so sorry that I couldn't control my feeling.
And we're now going to turn to our final speaker. Abdullah al-Nahas was resettled in Canada in 2019 from Syria. He currently works as an employment and assistance worker for the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction in Prince George, British Columbia, Canada, and is a fourth-year student at UNBC. Abdullah, over to you.
So first of all, thank to Anne, Momo, and Nahid for presenting, and thanks for having me here today to talk about my journey. And actually never expected to have a presentation one day title with my names, usually like I do for school things. So briefly about since I was born in 1994 in Syria, I was like citizen all the way till 2013. But between 2011 till 2013, I was displaced within Syria after the revolution started. I would be saying revolution because that's how it started. Later on, it's become more until like parties from outside Syria get involved in that. Then in 2013, that's the time we decided to move because it's become like really unsafe after being there during the war for 2 years. We moved to part of my family and myself, we moved to Jordan country. It's like just neighbor country besides Syria, and we live in Zatari refugee camp. It's like I think the largest refugee camp in Middle East. Then I got to Canada from 2017 till now. I come here as a immigrant, then now I'm citizen. I became Canadian citizen May last year. Moving to the next slide, please, Kate. So my education, as Ellie mentioned, that I'm fourth year student at the University of Northern British Columbia, UNBC. I'm doing double major in Marketing and Management Information System, MIS, and currently I am Employment and Assistant Worker, EAW, with the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. I have been working with this ministry for over 2 years now, as it was one of my goals, working with poverty, like people who like having difficulties or under poverty, similar to the situation I lived in between like Syria during the war and Jordan and refugee camp in Jordan. Moving to the next slide. So when did I arrive to Canada? It was on August 23rd, 2017, not 19. Sorry to correct that early for you. So that's unforgettable date for me, the date I arrived to a safe country, or like the safest country in my opinion. How that's worked. It's through the World University Service of Canada, SRP, or WUSC. They have like two names who support students to come to Canada, but they sponsor like only the student without any family. So how I achieved that, I applied 4 times, or like actually 4 years, because each year you can apply once, and I failed the first 3 times because of language barriers, because you need to have like good English where you can't start right away when you get to Canada here. And like being in Syria, if somebody know about Syria, like we study everything in Arabic, everything that's translated into Arabic. We have like zero English there. So I applied the first year, got rejected to the English language skills, applied again, still, applied third, still. The fourth time I passed English after like really hard time of self-learning English. So after arriving to Canada, yes, I'm in the safest place. I can do whatever I want. Then become facing the challenges that we never thought about. If we move into the next slide, we'll see the list of challenges. The language, number one, and I faced that a lot. A lot of instructor, they were telling me like, or like professors, like think in English or Arabic. Some professors, they were saying, think in your language. Some others, no, think in English. Till today, trust me, I still don't know what's the best way, think in my language or in English. Culture, it's totally different. Like, let's say A, Syria or Jordan were A, Canada is Z for me. Religion, it's like a multicultural or like multi-religious country. Beliefs totally different from what we have back in Syria and Jordan. Then the depression and the level of interest that people have and the perspective. So in the challenge here, when I was in the refugee camp, for me, I wanted to come to Canada or like be in a safe place, but like Canada was my target. But you know, like the pyramid needs like safety. So when you have the safety, you start looking for something else, and that's where the challenges start between like what's people interest here, what their perspective, what their like their opinion, how do they look at the world, how do they look at the life, and that's when the challenges started here. How did I overcome the challenge? With next slide, Kate. So the support I received a little bit from my family and new friends within Canada. They were trying to be like empathy all time with me, but like still they will not be like fully supportive, but they did their part in being supportive to me. Myself, how I supported myself, I had to be very social. Like I remember myself in Syria, I was like really very shy person. Like if anybody talked to me, I would like had like the red face, and I was just like I will try to stay away from any social activities. But being in Canada, you can't just be by yourself. You have to be social. Self-independable, you can't just rely on people. People, they will be there to help you, but they can't be 24/7 for you. So you have to get the support from them whenever they can give it to you, and like rely on yourself. Be realistic and open to change. Too many things have been changed here between, like as I mentioned in the challenge slide, between like the culture, the religion, too many things. You can't just be close-minded and live in Canada or anywhere in the world, but like moving from one country to another to a third, having like different culture and different backgrounds, that's really help. Fast adaptation, you can't just take too long time think about everything new you see around you. You have to accept it. Either you like it or not. It's existing, and you're in a country where it provides you a safety and um, like good place to live, good quality of life. So you have to adapt to the life in here. Sports, soccer, I put it in bracket here, as we call it back home, football, not soccer. So it's like so I have been like a soccer player since I was like 7 years old, and soccer coach for the last 10 years now. So the soccer, it's helped me always like build like really good connection myself around myself and in the community where I live. So for example, Prince George, British Columbia, it's like really I consider it today, it's my home city. It's a small town city, a 70,000 population. Um, it's really my city. Like whenever I walk into any grocery store or any place, like I see a lot of people who I either coach or play with soccer. So like it's really helped me a lot. So if you know something um, like a hobby or something, you can use it, just do it. And every time I fall into depression about the situation I'm in Canada, like the first thing I do, remember where I came from. When I remember for like 10 minutes the refugee camp I was in, when I remember like for 2 minutes Syria and the revolution and the war later, how it started and everything there, well, like I will like that will charge me, I would say. That will really inspire me. It's like, yeah, I came from refugee camp where I was like living in a tent with my family, unsafe, insecure, without power, without water, without anything. Like you barely have. They were giving us like set amount of liters of water per day for like drinking, washing, for everything. So when I remember these things, like I really like come over this challenge I have. With the next slide, Kate. Something else I'm doing now is I support my family. So my family still live in refugee camp since the 2013 when we moved together. I was able to come here to Canada by myself, and recently, just 3 months ago, I was able to sponsor one of my brothers after like 3 years of process. Mohammed, he landed on March 1st to Canada here, which is like, yeah, 3 months now. So the financial part, I'm responsible for my family in Jordan and my part of family in Lebanon and in Syria, sorry. And I have one of my brothers who live in Lebanon. All these three families rely on me financially. Between like the inflation today we're having here, like it's really getting hard on me. So having Muhammad here as my brother now is like helping. Now we are two in Canada. We will work, and the emotional support that I provide to my family. So because I know they live in refugee camp or in Syria unsafe, or they live in Lebanon. It's I don't know if anybody know about Lebanon, but like it's like a racist country. Like people there racist against themselves sometimes. So against Syrian, no doubt about it. So when I talk to them all time, like I pretend as if I'm living in the heaven. Yes, it's like really great place to live in Canada here comparing with where they live, but I will never tell them about the bad side, or like I will never complain to them about my situation here in Canada. So, and with that, I think let me just see last slide. Yeah, sorry, one more slide about my family here, my new family here. Sorry, I forget this one. I can't forget, but I forgot the slide. I got married August 22nd, 2020, 3 years now, during the pandemic, actually. My wife is like a great, amazing lady who is supporting me, Hibalo, and my daughter, Elena. She was born January 3rd, 2022. She's like a year and a half now. And that's my new family here with my brother now in Canada. And that's all on my end. And I will leave it to you. If you have any question, please feel free.